Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Super excited today. My guest today has got something going on that's really, really interesting. It's intrigued me. We've got Julian Carnall. He is the co-founder of Large Minority. They do I'm going to let him explain it a little bit, but it's Tuk Tuk tours combined with some competitive elements and some really, really cool stuff. So, Julian, welcome to the show. So happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Yeah, real pleasure.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I will go on. Sorry, I will jump in and help you with the intro on the Tuk Tuk side of things quickly. Yeah, we do Tuk Tuk adventures around the world in South Asia, a bit of Central America, Europe now, Italy. So people probably wondering what the hell is a Tuk Tuk adventure? Well, we would give you a Tuk Tuk. You would drive it around that country as the platform for an adventure. We would provide you with a bit of good support, and that's it in a nutshell. So Tuk Tuk adventures, yeah, Large Minority.
I love that you jumped in to correct me, because as I was listening to you, not so much correct me, but as I was listening to you, I realized I introduced it as Tuk Tuk tours, and that's really something different. Right. So anybody that's traveled around to some of these places may be familiar with the idea of a Tuk Tuk tour. If you're in Thailand, you can get a Tuk Tuk tour, but this is really something different. So I love that you added the word adventure to that.
Yeah, people can get a bit precious. I mean, especially we know in the adventure space, people can have a different preconception of tours in particular. We tend to try and avoid it only because we also know what that can mean, exactly how you've mentioned it. So we try and avoid that. However, there are some key ingredients. There's a group of people that join together. So we're not overly precious over that terminology.
Well, I appreciate that. And we're going to get back to that because I think that's super fascinating. And before we jump into that, I really want, myself and our listeners to kind of get to know you a little bit, Julian. So tell us a little bit about your story. We can go back as far as you want to go, wherever you think it was relevant in your childhood to help kind of shape the journey that you've been on. And how did you get from where you were to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was born and brought up in Kenya, East Africa, had an amazing childhood, very lucky to grow up in such a beautiful country, and lived in some really fairly remote areas in that time between Kenya and Tanzania. Because it was quite remote, early days was traveling for school, traveling abroad from a very early days. And I got that definitely a travel bug from I'd say living in Kenya, and growing up there. And then it was reflected in my first kind of industry job. It was travel related, working for a big airline, working in the Middle East, but definitely not my calling. Far more corporate focus, and I was always far more interested in getting off the beaten path. Getting into the bush is one of my favorite things still today. And somehow a bit of serendipity, I guess, tuk-tuks fell into my life. I was traveling myself around Sri Lanka at the time. This is going back 15 years. And anybody who's probably been in contact with a tuk-tuk would probably have a tuk-tuk related story. Definitely the case for me. I borrowed someone's tuk-tuk in the middle of central Sri Lanka somewhere. We borrowed the Tuk Tuk for a few days and then thought, wow, this is a great way to travel. This is the best way to travel. Might be a little bit biased, but had such a great time. And that was really when, my co-founder at the time, who happens to be Colombian as well, I think you're in Colombia, we thought it would be a great idea to get a bunch of people together and do this as a trip. And that's how it all started. So, yeah, I mean, I can carry on talking all the way through, but that was the introduction to travel. My introduction to travel started very early. Still have the bug. I still love, going to airports and visiting new places. And the first time you get there, that kind of, that culture shock that everybody gets. Yeah, it's what it's all about.
Yeah, very cool. I'm curious, what was your family doing in Kenya?
So my obviously British origin, my parents, my mother was born in Kenya as well. So this is left over from that, obviously the British colonial history, where there was a bunch of British people working in Kenya, living in Kenya. And then when independence happened, a bunch left and a bunch stayed. And my grandparents were on the side that stayed to make, just a normal living. They weren't, they were just, there's two kinds of the families or the colonial occupation that was in Kenya at the time. There was kind of the aristocrat side that had lots of land, and then there was just the workers who just were making a living, and was very much of the second side of that, where my grandfather was just working as I think he was a mechanic at that time, and that's why my mother was born there, and then I was born there. Met my dad in Kenya, and I was born there too.
And, okay, your dad was born in Kenya?
My dad was born in England. He moved to Kenya and met my mother when he was about 22, I believe. Yeah.
All right. Very cool. And the reason I ask is I'm just kind of interested in how parents, kind of their histories and their mindset about exploration and going to different places. So like your dad to pick up and move to Kenya, what drew him to Kenya? And you're just curious.
My father's passed away now. My mother will know better. I never really got to know the full reasoning why he left. I knew he was deeply unhappy from a very working class area of Middle England. He was from Sheffield, a very industrial part of England, and I knew that he always hated it. I mean, that was the story that we had always spoken about, that he hated the weather.
Yeah, I was just curious because sometimes people that pick up and leave their country and go to another place, and then their offspring tend to travel and tend to go explore and all that type of thing. So I was just wondering if there was a connection.
It's quite common. I agree. But no, my dad, he loved Kenya from the moment he set foot there, and never came back to England. So.
Yeah, well, that happens. I get that. I'm traveling myself. I'm in Colombia right now. I'm not. I'll probably step foot back in the U.S. at some point, but there's special places in the world, and it's fun to explore and find them. So for those of our listeners that are still, got to this point, and they're still kind of trying to figure out what is a tuk tuk. How do you describe a tuk tuk on a podcast where we can't show them?
I will do my best. I like to think of it as a hybrid between a two-wheeled motorbike and a car, a four-wheel car. It's three-wheeled. It's got, think of it as a protected motorbike with three wheels. You've got open side doors. You still have the handlebars of a motorbike. And you still have, you have a horsepower of about a lawnmower. So we're not talking a huge amount of power. And I also feel like I need to differentiate between, there's generally two types of tuk-tuks that exist. There's the type where you might close your eyes and take yourself back to Bangkok, where there's the uniquely Thai tuk-tuks, which are slightly different to what I'm explaining. They're a lot larger horsepower. They're a lot bigger vehicles. The ones that I'm talking about here really are the more traditional Indian versions, Also called auto-rickshaw. A lot of people get a bit finicky when you say tuk-tuk, because Sri Lanka, the locals refer to them as tuk-tuks, but in India they're very much like auto or rickshaw or auto-rickshaw.
Okay.
So yeah, the nuances of tuk-tuk names. But in short, it's not a very fast or powerful vehicle. It's a very good utility vehicle. So the access is amazing. You can go all over all sorts of terrain. Surprisingly, you can go up and down narrow streets, and it's a really great utility vehicle. As well, surprisingly, people will probably be, motorbikers or bikers will be rolling their eyeballs right now, thinking, "Nah, I prefer the speed." But it does get you access to different kind of places, which is why we love them.
And presumably, I've been in enough of them. It looks incredibly easy to drive. Are there any challenges at all to learning to drive them?
There's a little bit of there's a knack of getting used to it initially. I mean, if you've driven motorbikes in the past, it's very easy because you're used to they're not automatic in general. So you do have a gear system where you'd be much more familiar if you've driven motorbikes. The difference is the gears are on the handlebar. So you've got a foot pedal with the brake, you've got the gears on the left with the clutch on the handlebar, and you've got the accelerator on the right. So that if you've never driven one before, and certainly not a bike, if you've never driven a bike, it will take you, an hour to get used to that mental gymnastics of working out how to change the gears, and probably involve a bunch of gear grinding as you learn the ropes. But that's part of the fun, that's part of the fun.
I'm actually visualizing you out there with a group of your clients that just show up, and maybe mostly new clients, I don't know. And they all get there, and there's got to be, I'm sure you have like the first half day as instructional. I'm just imagining all these, I'm going to say the word tourists, but your guests in this setting, maybe in Sri Lanka or Colombia or whatever, and, driving around grinding gears, and some of the locals are just rolling their eyes.
That is exactly the case. That is exactly the case. The locals having a massive entertainment session as they watch a bunch of tourists trying to destroy their vehicle and get to grips with changing the gears. The best look is on their faces is especially the ones that do little research, which is totally acceptable, and they kind of arrive and they realize, shit, well, like, what have I signed up for here? I'm actually going to have to drive this thing myself. And then that moment of realization, like, what have I done? What have I maybe signed up for here? And then they get over that within an hour, sometimes a bit longer. But it is funny.
I can imagine. The first time you and I spoke, I'd mentioned to you that here in Colombia, at one point I saw some tuk-tuks, and I thought, man, I would just love to just get one of those and just like drive it all around South America. And, there's I only have like one suitcase. Everything I own fits inside of one bag. And I'm like, okay, that can go in the back seat real easy. Put a little tent and a sleeping bag in there and just go for it. And you'd mentioned that you've got a guy that that's kind of doing something like that. And I'm sure you've done an awful lot of exploring. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, exactly that. It is it is a great way to do that. You'd be amazed at the access that these kind of vehicles give you, just because when you become very approachable all of a sudden when you're in a vehicle that they're familiar with, and also it's a quirky, fun vehicle, right? So the barriers that you break down instantaneously as you drive into a village, that people are like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, why is he here in a tuk-tuk? And you mentioned he's going to kill me because I can't remember his name, but I had a good chat to him a couple of months ago. He's driving from the southernmost point in South America, Argentina, and I think he's on the way all the way up to Alaska. He's currently halfway through Chile, maybe. He's traveling with his beautiful dog, a Doberman. I think it's a beautiful, so his companion, and he's just making adventures pretty much every second of the day, right? He's going all sorts of remote terrain. The locals are getting him in. He's getting invited left, right, and center. But just having an amazing time.
Because I can imagine the difference, like you mentioned, just you're approachable. It's an interesting thing that you're doing, because
or that he's doing and that you've done is in your journeys, because the contrast is that the typical person doing the route from North America down through South America, all the way to the trip of, Tierra del Fuego, or as far south as you can go in Argentina, is riding some big, BMW
GS 100, 1100 or
thing with all the leathers on and the fancy helmet and the boots and
helmets.
And you can imagine, the people that live along that route that just see that day in and day out.
Yeah.
Some guy that looks like me or you shows up driving a Tuk Tuk and, with some bumper stickers on it probably. And I can imagine
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And while I love driving, I ride motorbikes as well, and I love that. But it's very I like to really make it clear how really different the experience is because of the access. Not only the speed, those bikes that we're talking about there, you're going to be cruising through towns at or certainly between towns, you're going to be moving at some pace. Whereas when these tuk-tuks, they don't really go over 50, 60 kilometers an hour downhill with the wind behind you. But uphill, you're almost in reverse, right? So it's
I can imagine some spots, especially in extreme South America, where it's really windy. And hilly. I can imagine there's okay, I think we're going to take today off, and
Well, so we did a trip to Pakistan, which is one of our most recent trips last summer, and it was an exploratory trip from our side. So we only invited a few we opened it to a few invitation, and we were traveling from the route goes from Islamabad to up the Karakoram Highway to the China-Pakistan border, right in the north, so Himalayas. And that border post, I think it's the highest border in the world, if I'm not mistaken. It's about 4,800 meters.
Wow.
And we were going to be, we were the first kind of tuk-tuk group to go up there. And I had put full disclosure to everybody there, I have no idea whether we're going to make it, because the altitude of these tuk-tuks, and we were going up, probably about total ascent of, Islamabad is less than 1,000 meters, I think. So, 3,500 meters up the Karakoram Highway. And people were looking at, at the bottom, the towns kind of close to the bottom, saying, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And we're like, we're going to the China border, but we don't know if we're going to get there. And, obviously you can see the look on the locals thinking, Jesus, what are these guys doing? Right. But it was amazing. It was fantastic. And every village, every town, the people were just loving it, supporting us. And, the photos and the selfies that you only get in South Asia is just incredible. And then we made it. So the short story is we made it. We didn't have a single breakdown. I think one broke a clutch cable or something, but everybody made it. And it was fantastic. It was such a good trip. We're going to do it again.
I'm imagining the differences between that experience that you created and enjoyed compared to, a tour bus or a group of motorcycles or what. Yeah, it's a totally different experience because, like you described, people are like, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And the selfies and the connection that you create there, almost it's pretty cool. I can kind of visualize that.
Yeah, just the stopping. You stop at you'll get stopped by every town or village, and they'll welcome you in. And then because it's open, because the doors are open, you're exposed to the same motorbikes, the smells, the taste of basically everything. The main difference is just that speed you're passing through. It's really at a bit.
And you're not wearing a helmet typically, right?
And you're not wearing a helmet. No.
So no doors, no helmet. Yeah, you're actually more open to the culture, the elements, in a sense, than you are on some of those larger motorcycles.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds
exactly.
like. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Do you? I just love this. I think it's a fascinating way to travel, and I'm pretty stoked to do it myself now. A couple things. One is, have you ever you or your groups ever had any issues with law enforcement thinking you stole these tuk-tuks because you guys don't look like you should be driving tuk-tuks? Does that happen?
No, so just for reference, we actually, so we borrow them. The agreement is like a borrowing, almost like we borrow them. We rent from local owners. So they tend to be, that's their business. So they're either like delivery or taxi drivers in general. Some of them, it's their family vehicle, and they'll rent it to us for that duration. And I mean, God knows what goes on in the law enforcement head when they see us. But, it tends to be a big smile and then like, oh, well, maybe I should check your papers just in case. Then there's a couple of questions about why are you doing this? And then it's like, okay, see you later. But in general, it's kind of have a smile and a selfie and then we're off. As long as you're not.
Because they probably don't have a lot of issues with tourists coming in and stealing tuk-tuks. So it's not something that they're on the lookout for per se. It's more of a curiosity, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So some of the more like seasoned like coppers will maybe be, depending on which country where you are, might be wanting to see registration documents or whatever. But in general, we get left alone as long as we're not racing down the highway or something.
Right. And I know that this probably varies by country, but I guess I'm curious, do your guests typically need to bring along any sort of motorcycle international driver's license with a motorcycle endorsement, or is it just, how does that typically work? Is there a...
So one of the beauties of the tuk-tuk is that actually in the countries we operate anyway, there's only a requirement to have an international driving permit
because the horsepower is so low.
It's a low horsepower, and they only require a category B like car endorsement. Sri Lanka in particular doesn't even. They have their own licensing system now, so you don't even need an international driving permit. You just need your local driving license, and then the AA will authorize an independent Sri Lankan permit. But in most of the other destinations, you just need an international driving permit if you're not from that country. I mean, we do, for example, do some trips in Italy now. Obviously, contrast, Pakistan to Italy, but they're in slightly different tuk-tuks. And there, for example, you just need a European license or an American license, driving license that's valid, and that works.
Okay, very cool. And and again, this is going to vary by country, but in general, if you just showed up in some place, because you've got the experience and the knowledge, but if someone were going to show up someplace and wanted to rent a tuk-tuk or get their hands on a tuk-tuk or whatever, I mean, what general advice would you give to them? Let's pick a country, I guess, Colombia, Sri Lanka, wherever. I mean, I'm sure it varies, but like, is that something that a person could realistically just go somewhere and start asking around and get their hands on a tuk-tuk?
I would say, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's how we started, right? I mean, that's exactly how I started, was convincing a guy to lend me his tuk-tuk, and he worked out what would be a fair deal. So I would say 100% that's possible. And anywhere these tuk-tuks, and then now, tuk-tuks are all over Africa, all over. You're in Colombia. They're all over Colombia. They're all over Central America. And it's growing. India is still making more tuk-tuks every year and exporting them to, these places. So there'll be more of them, and you'll definitely be able to negotiate with the local, few bits of hard currency, and he's going to give you his tuk-tuk. He doesn't love it that much.
Oh man, that's so cool.
Some, I mean, there's even some some of the real like rich, like say, it's the tuk-tuk culture, the local vehicle culture, where Sri Lanka definitely has some of it. Philippines has a lot of it, where they really love they'll do up their vehicles. They'll put speakers in. They'll put, some real kind of pimp level, interior, where they, beautiful works of art, really. That they might be slightly more reluctant to give your average gringo a tuk-tuk for the day, but in general,
there were a few that I saw in Guatemala that were pretty decked out, and I was like, I'm sure that they take a lot of pride in it. But other than that, I mean, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, we're in the process of actually just setting something up in Nicaragua at the moment, and we're going through that exact process of finding owners who are willing to part with their tuk-tuks, that negotiation stage of like, okay, what are you going to do? So it's fun. It's fun. And normally the next stage is, they'll realize that, oh, so foreigners going to drive it as well. Maybe I should put the price up.
Do you wait?
So
you discuss that with them after you negotiate the deal?
We don't fully say that we can't. Yeah.
Let's change the subject.
Yeah.
This is a good time to go a different direction. Okay. That all. There's so many fascinating things. We're going to move into the type of person. Well, actually, it's not just about the tuk-tuks here. I mean, that's an interesting platform that you use. But my understanding, based on our last conversation and some research I've done, is you're doing some other things that are kind of really different that could be done on motorcycles or whatever. But the tuk-tuks are a great platform. So tell us about the other part, what else? What's the other part of the business that makes it unique from your perspective?
Yeah, well, so from our side, we've always been very passionate about like we call it like the responsible tourism angle that we're very passionate about, where it's more of just supporting the destination that we're visiting and traveling, and promoting that, that other people come and visit it as just as travelers, and putting that destination like front and center. And a way that we saw was very beneficial and powerful to do that was adding an element that we call challenges on these events, because we're trying to get people to not only visit, a lot, like really dig deep in the destination by, traveling in that way, but then also learning more about the places they visit, like learning more about the culture, learning more about the food, learning more about the people. Not just on the surface. And one of the best ways that we found to do that was, humans, we are naturally a little bit competitive, all of us. I mean, it's in our DNA. And you might not say that you're competitive, but if I put you in a group, and I say, you're going to compete, you will. You may not go deep dive, but there's always going to be an element of competition that's interesting. And so we set up these things called challenges. They normally have a theme. We have like 4 kind of core themes, which is like food, language, culture, and then responsible travel, which could normally is on the social layer, really. So like getting involved in some community projects, and those we will set teams challenges each day, not like a huge amount, but just enough to get them to to taste that destination. So as an example, normally on the first day of most of our trips, we'll do some sort of exotic food challenge, which will basically encourage them not only to say, it's perfectly fine to eat the food here because you might be nervous, but also try something really exotic that you wouldn't necessarily find. And that's just an example that gets people to then realize on the first day that that's perfectly possible and that I can go and find this and it's fine to eat. So that's an extra element that we do. It's totally optional. We have it as a challenge set each day. You can participate in this if you want to. You can get points, and you can, overall, you may get some fun. Some pretty good winnings actually. But in general, it's done in a way to really just to learn about the destination and feel like you've really visited it instead of just being on a tour bus or being a passerby.
It sounds very cool. Does the typical, so let's say, what's the typical group size? Is it like a dozen?
So, yeah, I would say closer to just under 20. So, okay. Depending on the trip, for example, Italy, we've at the moment got like 8 tuk-tuks. So you're looking at a maximum of 16. And bear in mind, we on our trips, and I'm just talking about our trips. I'll mention some other tuk-tuk adventures that exist that we know very well and we love. They're slightly different formats. on our trips, we would say it's a group, but you're only really together when you're in the morning at an accommodation point, sharing a meal, and then in the day you're completely free to go anywhere you like. We give a suggested route, but when there's no form of follow a group leader or follow like a train or a convoy. You're completely independent in the day, and then you would catch up as a group again in the evening, where you would then share those stories or catch up from the stories of the day, really.
Yeah. So it's like a mix kind of between solo travel and group travel with all the elements and having those challenges. I love the challenges because, I mean, I do a lot of solo travel, and sometimes I'll just pick out a challenge for myself because I know I'll have a different result. I'll just, sometimes I'll just go on a map and find a weird place on a weird road, and I'll just I'm going there. I don't know how I'm going to get there. And it's figuring out how to get there is a lot part of the fun. And it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of that as well. It maybe sounds very similar.
Yeah, it is. We tailor them specifically to the destinations. And I'll give you another example. Sri Lanka, for example. I mean, there's I would say after all my travels, Sri Lanka is one of the friendliest people I've ever met in my life.
I'm sure the ones I haven't been, but the ones I've met in other places. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And we do a challenge there that's, it's called the, it's called the rice and curry challenge. So rice and curry, anybody that's been to Sri Lanka will know rice and curry is just the Sri Lankan staple. It's what every Sri Lankan 99% will eat for lunch every day of the year. And it normally involves one, a giant pile of rice and then 5 or 6 different curries, vegetable normally, and then topped with either like a piece of fish or a piece of chicken on the top. That's rice and curry. We set a challenge to participants where we would give them a list of ingredients in Sinhalese, which is the area we're normally in the south. Sri Lanka has Tamil and Sinhalese, but this is normally in the south that we are, and they'll have to. And with a budget of something like 1,000 rupees, which is probably I don't know, $8 now or something. And they will have to find that ingredients themselves in the market, buy it. They then have to take that ingredients to a local family. And they would have to, friendly enough, invite themselves for lunch to join the family for lunch with these ingredients. Now, if you probably got people listening thinking, Jesus, if I do that in my country, I'm either going to get, I don't know, something's going to happen and I'm not going to be too welcome. I can assure you that every single person who's ever done it in Sri Lanka has had the best experience, one of the best experiences of their lives, because they're welcomed into this family. And they've got a pile of rice and some fish and some vegetables, and they say, "Hey, let's cook this." And these guys, the Sri Lankan family loves it. They're like, they're so happy to show the culture, the food. Some of them, you see the videos of interactions of that, and they don't even speak English. The other guys obviously don't speak a word of Sinhalese, but there's that connection where they're just, showing them how to cook, to grate the coconut, and it's brilliant. And anybody that's done one of our trips will all have a story related to that, because it's a magical way to interact.
That sounds so much better than some of the ways people are traveling. What kind of person is attracted? I have so many questions. I guess what kind of person is attracted? Do they generally come as singles, or will you get some couples or groups or families that will come do this? I mean, obviously it's hard. You've got probably one person per Tuk Tuk, but how does that look?
Yeah, we normally, so we encourage, and the way that our collateral and the way that we position ourselves, we encourage people to join as a team. It doesn't make for great marketing for ourselves. We're aware of that, because it's quite hard you need to sell 2 tickets instead of 1, essentially. But that does make it easier, because you're sharing you're sharing the room, you're sharing the driving, because the driving can be quite challenging. Some longer distances. So to answer your question there, it tends to be a team of 2. You can also do a team of 3. And then the kinds of people, I mean, we get kind of 2 clear across different types of groups. We get people who have either had kids and they've left and they've got plenty of time and they're now just traveling around the world and they love a different kind of adventure. That's one. And then we've got the other kind of maybe slightly younger, but, working that maybe has a little bit less time on their hands, but wants a really action-packed adventure, does not want to just go and sit on a beach, wants to, have a really good adventure. Those are the kinds that a lot of mother-daughter teams, father-son teams. You'll get a family with grown-up kids, then the parents would be one and the kids will be in the other, and they'll compete against each other, which is really funny. We obviously get, couples and then groups of friends. So real cross-section. I mean, we've had, an 80-year-old participant driving a tuk-tuk the whole way around Sri Lanka. And we've had, families that come, with kind of young teenagers that are happy to join. And that group dynamic is so much fun when you have such a difference of people from all over the world. And we've been lucky enough that we've always had participants from, quite global. So it's not just a bunch of Brits like cruising around Sri Lanka. It's, we have South Africans, British, Americans, Australians. It tends to be English speaking like countries just because, we've always started with English as a company. But then we're starting to see more, Scandinavians, Europeans, other Asian countries, Singapore, Hong Kong. So real mix, and it's great. It makes for a great group dynamic.
Cool. From the time you first borrowed that tuk-tuk in Sri Lanka that you'd mentioned to the point where you started selling adventures, tuk-tuk adventures, how much time was in there? I'm trying to get a feel for, you developing the business. What did that look like? How long did that take? How long have you been doing that?
So I came up with the idea probably in 2006, and I thought I was the first person to have the idea. And I was like, oh, here we go, bingo, because I'd driven the tuk-tuk and I was like, oh, let's do this. And I was like, oh, but it's going to be unique. Turns out, just like most ideas, it's not, and someone has thought of it before you. And there was, and they're still running. There's a company in India that I joined the trip for as, for me, it was like a R&D trip. To go and discover, what this would be like. And I drove a tuk-tuk from Chennai across to Bombay, Mumbai, which is about 2,200 kilometers. Had obviously an amazing time. It was a really tough trip. It was the middle of the monsoon season, so we got, up in the Ghats, the Western Ghats, we got seriously bamboozled with some rain like I've never seen in my life. But of course, the adventure of a lifetime. And I was, a young kind of, innocent kind of 22-year-old, or I can't even remember how old I was then. But, it was driving anybody that's been to India, that's enough to slap you in the face, right? A good Indian adventure. And then it was 2009 so I was then building it probably with my co-founder in 2008. We had it as a part. We had both full-time jobs. It was initially as a side gig, a side hustle, and a bit of fun. But we had a great network we were living in the Middle East at the time in 2007, living in Dubai. We had a really good network, and we managed to pull together like 30 teams in our first one. And I mean, the first adventure, I can't even probably say too much about it without someone suing me, but it was chaotic, but it was really fun. At that time, again, very naively, I'd set it up as a race. We had set it up as a race. So if you can imagine a kind of Formula One-esque starting line where we had 5 tuk-tuks in a row and then like a flag off and a countdown, and we had about 3 accidents before they'd even left the gate. That was very different to how they run now. We learned very quickly speed and competitive speed doesn't fly. So we stopped that.
Yeah.
But that was the timeline roughly.
All right. That's that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is like, what are the big lessons you learned along the way? And that sounds like a big one.
That was one of the big ones. Yeah.
I can imagine that. Anything else that, knowing what you know now, so anybody that's listening to this that, is maybe excited to get into tourism, thinking about a tourism business. I'm sure they're not thinking about a Tuk Tuk business. We're not going to coach them on how to start a Tuk Tuk adventure business. But I guess the question is, anybody listening to this thinking about going into business, what advice would you give them knowing what you know now?
That's a really tough question. You've caught me off guard a little bit here. I think what I would say is really have a very good idea of what your product is, what your offering is going to be, and how you're going to be really different from other people in the market, and ask as many people about that to validate that as well, to maybe validate that's that is why you're different, that it is unique, because there's so many, and I've seen, especially obviously COVID is a terrible example because it wasn't their fault that they went under, but even COVID aside, the amount of travel businesses that when you go to a show or where other travel businesses present themselves, that sometimes the product offering is just so similar. And especially in some of the big markets where you know that all of them are using the same operators in the end country, and it's a marketing spin, and whoever's got the most amount of marketing capital will convince you to go with them. So I think that would be a long-winded way of saying really make sure that you're working with. That what your offering is different. And I'm a big fan of this, of going direct myself to the destinations. I guess it's a little bit ironic that I try and get people to come to me to take them to those destinations. But when it's myself, I'm definitely a big fan of people, going to locally owned and locally operated places in country. Myself.
Yeah. Great. No, I think that was, I don't think you said I caught you off guard, but wow, what a great response. So thank you for sharing that. It's very cool. Is there anything about this business what do you like most about it? What do you like most about what you've created in general? And that can be anything.
I sometimes forget, have been in it and doing it so long, forget how cool the trips really are. And again, it might sound a bit biased, or maybe even a bit arrogant, but like when I speak to people, past participants or clients of mine, and when they talk about the trips, that the experience they have and how they talk about it to other people, it's almost when I'm like a fly on the wall, to hear the genuine excitement and passion that they kind of give from that experience is really is the best. There's nothing better than knowing that that validation of that trip that you created or you've conceptualized is a winner. That's probably the most rewarding for sure, because when it comes from someone else, it's great.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm sitting here smiling pretty big ear to ear. I mean, I just love that. I can resonate with that. Yeah. What's the part you hate that you dislike? I'm just going to say dislike, or what's the part of this business that maybe you wouldn't tell everybody running around and chatting about it, but we're here in a podcast. So what's the part that you really don't care for?
When you're running your own business and you're, at quite a small scale, there is, if you're running it properly, there's a lot of stuff that is really, really dull behind the scenes. That has to be done. That's obviously one of that's probably an easy answer. It's not obvious that nobody really likes to do a bunch of tax work or admin work. That's obvious. And you could in most times pay someone to do that. I think what's sometimes frustrating is knowing, almost like alluding to the first part of what I really like is sometimes not being able to convince or to capture the people that you know, a larger audience that you believe should be coming on your trips, because you've had the validation from one side and the frustration of not being able to really communicate how good that is through the tools that you have. That's frustrating for sure sometimes. I don't think I've anyway.
That's a good point when you're excited about your product and what you're offering, because I don't necessarily like the word product, but that's what I'm going to use right now. When you're excited about your product, you're excited about the experience that you've created, with and for other people. And then you just get excited. You're like, I want to share this. This is amazing. I want to change more lives. I want to impact more people. I want to, impact more communities, both the people that are traveling to those communities, people that live in those communities. So yeah, that's, I get that. So do you have any big exciting announcements or big plans for this? We're recording this in early 2024. Curious if you have any big exciting plans for anything upcoming. You mentioned Italy. Is something you're...
Yeah,
and then Pakistan.
Italy's a fairly new... there's a few. I'm really excited about Nicaragua. We're just about to... It's not even official. We haven't really announced anything yet. We're in the beginning stages of doing something in Nicaragua, Tuk Tuk based. I'm excited because I haven't been there yet, but I've got a really great team kind of working that out, and it looks fantastic. And I'm just really excited to go myself. It's one of the best parts of these things is that would be that first trip, and then meeting a bunch of new people and new destination. Like I said, new country is always really exciting. And then Italy, while it's very different from our other destinations, we normally tend to be, just a little bit more tropical. And then Italy is a little bit different, but it's also really cool. And it's quite a new product. We a bit of a story on Italy because we launched it as kind of a COVID pivot. We didn't know what was happening. We were trying to work out with which destinations we might be able to operate in sooner rather than later. And because of our geographic location to the UK, we thought somewhere in Europe would be quicker to open than the long haul destinations, especially from some of our source market. And we then did some digging about tuk-tuks in Italy. Turns out there's an incredible history with tuk-tuks in Italy. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Italy actually created the tuk-tuk. The Italians created the tuk-tuk because, and not many people know this, but the Italians would have won. It was between, it's not quite clear whether it was the Japanese or the Italians that first created the first tuk-tuk. But in most cases, it seemed to be agreement that the Italians did it at the end of the Second World War, and they were using it in a lot of the small medieval towns to get mainly the harvest and the rice. A bit of rice in some areas, but mainly the farming equipment and stuff through the medieval towns, because all of the narrow streets, and the tuk-tuk was perfect for that. So we found that history there with Italy. And then turns out they have these tuk-tuks called, we use the Ape Calesino. So Piaggio is the brand, and then Calesino. And as with most things Italian, they're just a little bit sexier than most other places. And they've got like a cabriolet, so it's got you can put the roof down, and it's just Italian, which is.
Do you think you'll attract a slightly different crowd? Clientele for
we've definitely noticed a slightly different crowd for that, which we're totally happy with. And it's just it's a little bit of a softer adventure, just because of kind of what you're experiencing, like the beautiful like vineyards of Barolo and Lake Como and all of that kind of stuff is a slight different from some of the South
and when
Asian
you set a challenge of
stuff.
go eat something exotic in Italy is a little different than something exotic in Sri Lanka or Colombia.
Well, you say that, but there's some pretty exotic meats in Italy. They do
That's
like
true.
their
or some
their
cheeses.
offal.
There's some cheeses there.
And cheeses, very good cheeses. Yeah, very good. And actually, some of their most Italian wine is fantastic, really. But you do get some proper vinegar in some areas. Like you get given a glass in glass of rosé that's made by a local area, and some of it is undrinkable. But it's surprising, but it's
cool.
It's fine.
I do want to touch on.
It's delicious.
Yeah. I do want to touch on Pakistan real quick before we wrap up, because I think that that's an area that a lot of people have some story. I don't know if I want to say stories around. There's things going on in the world. But when you described your trip to Pakistan and what you guys were doing, it sounded very, very cool, very, very interesting. Something I'd like to go see. But what can you share with the listeners about Pakistan right now, or just your thoughts in general about visiting places that sometimes have things going on?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some, like, my thoughts on that is, I mean, Pakistan is a prime example of they've deeply suffered from the post 9/11 kind of axis of evil modeling that was positioned in a lot of that part of the world. And there's no doubt that there's areas of Pakistan that nobody would be sensible to visit. But there's a large part of Pakistan that is totally fine to visit. And I think that I would imagine most of your listeners would be very aware of that. Do some proper research, speak to some people that are on the ground. Just don't read, the front pages of mainstream media is the short answer. Really dig deep to what's going on in the ground. And Pakistan is a prime example of that. I mean, prior, I was speaking to some old hoteliers and old, people in the industry up in the Hunza Valley, which is a valley up the Karakoram Highway. And these are guys that are, veterans, old hotel owners and stuff. And, they would talk about the kind of glory days. And this was obviously all pre 9/11 axis of evil, kind of, so to speak, where, that whole area it used to be seen as, it was part of the hippie trail almost, that most people would a lot of Europeans would spend the summer up in that area, and then they would all travel down to Goa in India for the winter. And tourism was booming. It was, that whole area was always really, really popular. I'm talking about the areas that we visit, and that's the areas that I can talk about because I've been there firsthand. But yeah, to answer your question, we wouldn't. If there was a genuine threat to if we thought there was a threat to safety for participants, we wouldn't take people there. So people, it is. We obviously, we're aware of the reputation it has because we get those questions. Is it safe?
Yeah. And do you feel like is that a big challenge for you? I mean, obviously it's a challenge to overcome kind of the perception and thoughts and ideas that people have, but do you already have a trip scheduled back to Pakistan?
Yeah, we do. We have one in September. We've got about 6 or 7 teams signed up. So okay. We know that there's a bit of uncertainty right as we speak because there's some they're having elections. A lot of times elections is a bit of an unstable period. But so we're hoping that things. Yeah,
but it sounds like you've got some momentum going. You've got some people signed up.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring it up because hopefully some of our listeners. I mean, I'd love to go to Pakistan, and I don't know much about it. So most of what I know is what I hear, honestly. And, but I also realize that what I hear is not always spot on. So a trip like this sounds like a pretty cool way to go.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And especially the area that we go to. I mean, I might be a bit biased, but it is one of the most beautiful. I had been to I've been to northern India north, right in the far northeast of India, like Ladakh and like on the Kashmir border side. And I'd done a motorbike trip up there, and that was obviously spectacular, because the Himalayas are spectacular, and you've got, the 8,000 meter peaks and things. It's just wild and rugged and amazing. But then when you go up the Pakistan side, there's just, the scenery is unreal. Again, because of the level of 7,500, 8,000 meter peaks in a short area, in a short distance from each other, the dramatic scenery is just unbelievable. And depending on the time of year, the orchard, the kind of cherry orchards and the apricot orchard, the fruit, it's just incredible. I mean, it really is.
It's interesting listening to you describe it. And of course, I've got the benefit of being able to see your face because we're doing this, video as well. And I'm sitting here listening to you. I'm thinking like, man, like, I wonder if Julian knows how freaking cool these trips are that he's talking about. And like, does he have to remind himself sometimes? It's like, holy shit, this is really cool, because it's like, you're so in it. Like, I know, it's cool, but like somebody else, like, okay, Tuk Tuk, Pakistan, Himalayas, China border, whatever, all this stuff that you're talking about is like really freaking cool. And do you sometimes have to like remind yourself of that? Or is it just like, you just live that, like, yeah, this is really cool stuff all the time?
Yeah, I don't. Obviously, you've reminded me, and I can get carried away sometimes. Yeah, there's definitely times when I'm talking about, and I kind of go back to those moments and like live those. But they're only because they're just so genuine. As in the places, they're just, it's such a good experience to be there. And like I was just saying, that area there, you just kind of, there's this place, I think it's called Sost, which is the last border town before you go up to the China border, because you can't actually cross the China border unless you've got all sorts of paperwork and stuff. I'm sure, yeah. And you've got I think it's about a 400 meter buffer zone where you can't really get to the border, but like most borders, I guess. But there was this small like hotel we were staying at, and it was an orchard full of cherry trees. And I mean, they were full of cherries. And I was like, not only did I not know I had no idea there was cherries in this area, but you would just, you'd pick apricots and cherries while looking at like a 8,000 meter peak in front of you. It's just amazing. It was just amazing. It's really,
it sounds surreal. Just listening to you describe it sounds surreal. So, very cool. Julian, we've had quite a conversation, a lot of stuff. I feel like we could continue forever. And I'm curious, are there anything that I forgot to ask, should have asked, or anything else you want to make sure that our listeners are aware of, either about you, the world in general, Pakistan, Tuk Tuk?
I don't think so. I think
anything else we should cover before we wrap up?
No, I think we've had it's been great speaking to you. You brought out a lot of like things that, I haven't even really thought about too much recently, getting bogged down in more boring stuff. So it's been great. Yeah. I mean, I would just say to people, the next time you see a Tuk Tuk, have a go, like convince someone to lend it to you, or get in the back. Get in the front, normally you'll get a very good response. More Tuk Tuk.
I'm going to do it. I'm in Colombia. They're around here, not in Medellin too much, but I'm going to be out in the hills, and I'm going to do it. And I love that. So very cool. Julian, thank you so much. Appreciate you joining me for this conversation and sharing a little bit about your world and helping everybody make this big world feel just a bit smaller. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, Please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.